Oh, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled, Be Smarter About How Fraud is Stealing Your Ad Dollars. Our speakers today are Jalal Nasir, CEO at Pixalate, and Amin Bandiali, CTO, also at Pixalate. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that you can ask questions by typing into the Q&A box. You can also tweet your questions to Pixalate Inc. or post questions on our Facebook page. Jalal and Amin will answer your questions during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Without further delay, I am pleased to welcome our first speaker, Jalal Nasir.
Thank you so much, Keiko. Hello, everyone. This is Jalal Nasir. Thank you so much for attending and being present for the webinar. I want to start with a few quick introductions. As Keiko mentioned, my name is Jalal. I am the CEO and co-founder of Pixalate. I also have Amin Bandiali, who will be presenting with me. He's the CTO and co-founder of the company. As Keiko mentioned, one of the things that we are doing different with this webinar is we are trying to make it a bit more interactive. And one of the things that we've done is we are encouraging you guys to, start tweeting your questions to our Pixalate handle, which is mentioned in the orange tabline below at Pixalate Inc. Or you can also join our Facebook page and start posting your questions over there. So some brief introduction about the company. Pixalate, essentially, Amin and I started Pixalate in 2012. We are headquartered in Santa Monica, Southern California, Los Angeles area. We have presence in San Francisco, New York, and London. So the key problem that we solve, so we are essentially an ad technology platform, and there are two things that we essentially do. One is fraud detection and prevention, which is what we will go through today. And the second part is media planning and optimization. And one of the key differentiators what we have about the company is we actually cover both desktop and mobile. So we essentially are cross platform, in terms of how we report back on analytics and on recommendations, et cetera. So in terms of the agenda today, one of the things that we want to do in this session is really share some of the key learnings that we've experienced, just helping our clients with fraud detection and prevention, and really sort of, in some ways educating, most of the folks who are on the webinar today in terms of how fraud is perpetrated. So key things that we'll go through today is like, what is fraud? How is fraud defined? Why is it important? And why should, we care? We'll also share some of the industry benchmarks. So in terms of, various percentages across different devices, et cetera, we've rolled up some benchmarks from close to 50 billion impressions that we've tracked in the last couple of months. We'll also, hit on two key things, which I think are sort of like the fundamental of this webinar. One is how fraud is perpetrated in the ad ecosystem. So we look at some of the attack vectors, and we'll sort of walk you through that. And the second part is, which we want to focus on, and there's a lot of hype in the industry about this, but nobody's really talking about the details, is the fraud element in mobile. So we'll address some of the fraud challenges that appear over there. Then we'll give you sort of like a quick overview of our Pixalate solution in terms of how we enable that, and essentially go through the Q&A after that. We leave like at least 15 minutes for the Q&A. Again, encourage you guys to go check out our Twitter, post questions over there, or sign up on our Facebook page, and you can also sort of post questions over there as well. So let's start with the fraud definition. So what we did was, there's, there's a lot of, discussion, going on in the industry about fraud. And one of the things that I think the IAB has done a good job in starting this group, which is called TOGI, and essentially what it stands for Traffic of Good Intent. And they have come up with an interesting, definition as a first step for how fraud is defined. And really, I think in one line, they're saying it's a non-intentional visit to a publisher which occurs without the knowledge of the user or is driven by non-human actors. So the most important thing in this definition is if you had to take away two words from this definition, there's a long line that they published. We actually use that from the TOGI's website. The two words that you should take away from this. and those are non-intentional traffic, where the user is not aware when such an activity happens, or it's being initiated by some sort of a computer software, sometimes known as malware or computer bots, essentially. I think the IAB has done a good job in starting this, but from what we see, it's still, I think it's an evolutionary process where some of the things where they're not addressing are, for instance, mobile, like, how is fraud defined in mobile. It also sort of doesn't go into the details of, for instance, various types of fraud, for instance, ad injection and ad stacking. And we'll, cover some of those things. But that's how, how the industry is sort of coming together and defining the core thing, which is non-intentional traffic. So, we've actually captured that in an infographic or a graphic, if you will, which kind of shows you, how the system flows through the pipeline, if you will. How, the fundamental problem that, all of us in the ad ecosystem are trying to solve is, okay, how do you differentiate between a Bob Smith versus a Bart Smith? And, how, do sort of transactions sort of go through the ecosystem as money is changing hands? So, in terms of the size, like, why should you care about this thing, after what we've defined, what fraud is? We actually, took some notes. eMarketer ran, posted this thing in last year, I think around December, where, they posted that, U.S. digital spend, like in, digital advertising, is estimated to be $47 billion, this year. And that covers, obviously, search, display, and all the other various channels. And what they're, what the IAB and the media posts are saying is, based on the research that they have seen, is at least 33% of that $47 billion will be spent on fraudulent inventory. Now, that's a huge number. And, it's one of those things where, as we've done some more research, what we are seeing is, based on some other research studies that we found, that, essentially bots are sort of like generating the bulk of the traffic. And I'm not sure if you guys, we also, we use this data from a research study that was done by VentureBeat. We also saw another interesting study that was posted by TechCrunch, where also sort of posting like half of the internet traffic is being generated by fraud. So a huge number. So essentially what this is, right now, I mean, this is such a new phenomena in terms of as the data and research is sort of revealing, it's really becoming sort of like a wild, wild west out there, which is really sort of triggered by as more inventory on the advertising side is easier to sell and buy, really fueled by the programmatic channel. It has become really hard to keep track of these things. And so much so that, nobody is immune, whether you are a publisher or, on the supply side, or a network or a supply side platform, a buyer, a DSP, an agency, a trading desk, everybody is impacted with this key thing. And, we actually used some of the key sort of news that we saw that was posted again last year and earlier part of this year as well, where, even, channels like social media, this was posted on Business Insider a couple of days ago, where, how a small business is ending up paying more than $500,000 in fraud, with some of the, fake clicks that are generated. Also, there's a huge story that was posted in Adweek, almost a couple of months ago, which covered like how fraud is being perpetrated and how, some of the agencies and trading desks and advertisers are buying fake traffic, and even the publishers don't know that, that's the channel that, is basically flowing through that system. And even the last part is even like big giants like, Microsoft and Google, et cetera, they're also seeing a huge amount of fraud happening through botnets on their networks, on search networks like Bing, et cetera. And, we have a story of clipping from that posted over here as well. So essentially, sort of the bottom line, what we kind of crystallize this thing into two things. Nobody is immune. And as a seller, whether you are a publisher or a supply-side platform or anybody who's involved in selling inventory, if you, if you don't sort of take care of that or start to get ahead of this thing, you're really exposing your business to, to bad reputation, possible lawsuits, risk losing business to other competitors. And what we're seeing most, as we talk to a lot of the folks in the industry, as this phenomena is becoming more rampant, a lot of the buyers are coming back to publishers and asking for a refund. And what happens is not only are the publishers, losing money from that channel, but they're also losing money from the ad serving fees that, they end up paying serving ads to fraudulent impressions. And then, in some of the extreme cases, we're also seeing some of the higher, big publishers who themselves might not even know that they're, have fraudulent traffic happening on their website, are getting banned from these exchanges, which have a very high bar for fraud. And then eventually the buyer, whether you are, a network or a DSP or an agency trading desk or, or an advertiser, I mean, for the buyer, the big thing is that you're losing money on an inventory which is not real and which is fraudulent. And especially if you're buying something on behalf of a client, then not only are you losing your client's money, but you're also, losing your sort of reputation as well and damaging your credibility. So what we've done is, we try to, in some ways, quantify the whole phenomenon of fraud, at not just at a high level as the IAB and the media posts and those folks have done, but what we've done is we've come up with some of the benchmarks based on some of the data that we've seen ourselves, through Pixalate's platform, and really try to bring that to life. So some of the folks can relate to that, and really what we've done is sort of broken those by channel. So one of the things that, we basically ran a study last year and basically broke our data down by percentage of fraudulent impressions by various channels. And what we saw was that huge amount of fraud was being perpetrated through the mobile channel, which, was close to 38% based on the research that we did, and close to like 10 billion impressions that we tracked. Display came second with roughly 35%, and video being 22%. And really, so we dug deeper into that in terms of why mobile was so huge, and just, how mobile buying and selling is being facilitated on RTB and how that's growing, and some of the quick farm activity that we are seeing with a lot of the open operating system environments is having a huge impact in terms of some of the numbers that we're seeing over there. We also did, kind of broke down the data by categories, which was already, wanted to share that with you guys, as, the fraudulent impressions by various websites. And what we found out was that a huge amount of fraud was being perpetrated on shopping websites and also on education websites. Initially, it was very alarming for us, but, when we started to dig deeper into the data, two facts came to life. One was that, shopping websites had a lot of bots who were actually going and scrapping some of the data points. And also, with both shopping and education, what we found out was that a lot of the frauds, the ads that were being run on those websites were CPC campaigns, were really sort of, click-based advertising. And, there are a lot of malware which is out there, which makes it easier for, for people to download that and generate massive amount of clicks as opposed to impressions to essentially, make more revenue or make more money as part of the fraudulent transaction. We also did another take on how to break this data by browser types, which is very interesting. As you can see, this is data that we collected, in the last couple of months on our, on the impressions that we've tracked, and we saw a huge amount of spike in Opera Mini and also Internet Explorer, or some of the two big drivers in basically the browsers which are generating fraudulent traffic. And what we found out was that some of them had software that would stimulate the IE environment very well and would hide behind those things. And also some of the click farms was also being generated from Windows environments, which were also sort of leading to a higher rate of fraud coming from those activities. This is also some data that we picked up from the devices. We actually dug it to the next level. And as mentioned before, some of the mini data that we've seen from Opera Mini was a huge sort of driver in the fraudulent activities. Now, this is my personal favorite. So as we were digging around the data, this is something that you probably will not see in any of the benchmarks, is what we also did was we conducted a research in terms of the fraud percentage, which you see on the y-axis, compared to the x-axis, which is the domain age. And what we mean by the domain age is how long has the website been created or was registered. So if a website was registered last month, it would have a domain age of 1 month. And if the website was registered a couple of years ago, proportionately as well. And what we found out was, as you can see from the left side of the graph, the websites that were registered more recently had a very, very high percentage of fraud sort of occurring from those sites, which are basically being spawned off, where you see like a site that just suddenly came into existence a month or so ago and suddenly was generating millions of impressions. That clearly had some challenges over there. So that's another thing that we kind of identified. Now, the other thing which is also a common sort of, we believe it's a myth in the industry is we're busting this myth from this is a lot of people think that fraud only happens at the click level or just at the conversion level. Generally, primarily before historically, advertising has been in the CPC business. What we are seeing is a huge amount of fraud being perpetrated at the impression level as well. And one of the things that we found out was that a lot of the either the publishers intentionally or non-intentionally were increasing the number of impressions for campaigns which are primarily CPM driven. So really reflecting the way media is being bought on these channels. Any website which is doing more CPM campaigns will have a higher number of impressions. Similarly, for CPC campaigns, that would reflect click tracking, where you have like two types of fraud happening at the click level. One is where the advertising budget, the intention was to drive the advertiser out of their budget, and the second intention was to really sort of increase inflate the publisher click-through rates and inflate that number to kind of show good performance over there. Now, this one audience verification piece we unearthed literally 2 months ago. A lot of the DSPs, the agencies, the advertisers, also the publishers are using DMPs primarily, or are buying data from third-party providers. What we also found out was some of those cookies were coming from fraudulent machines, etc. So there's an element of audience verification because most of the publishers or the buyer of that data are paying that sometimes on a unique user basis or at a CPM level basis. And so it's very important to basically verify that what you're buying in terms of the data is not coming from a bot, but it's actually real human. So in the next part, what we want to basically shed some more light on different types of fraud vectors that are available. And we've sort of divvied that up into 2 parts. One is the human-based factor, which I initially mentioned, and then the second part is non-human-based fraud types. I will let Amin Bendali, who's the CTO of the company, to essentially take you through that part and also cover the mobile part, and then I will basically go through some of the prevention techniques, etc.
Thank you, Joel. Hey, everybody. So what you see in this slide, essentially we have divvied up the online fraud that happens into 2 different sections. One is human-based, which we detect as well as non-human-based fraud types. And what we've done is actually we've kind of put a benchmark on what we've seen. As, for example, as you can see, incentivized network is essentially 25% of the web fraud that happens on the internet. And then we have click farms and crowdsourcing. And I'm going to take all of you through them one by one, starting the next slide. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the crowdsourcing, where, crowdsourcing is when thousands of humans are recruited and paid a nominal amount to view an article or view some sort of web page or generate thousands and millions of impressions on some premium or non-premium domains. Now, they're unaware that they're performing fraudulent activities. Now, this is specifically important because those folks and things like, Amazon's Mechanical Turk could be used to, let's say, a campaign could be launched saying, to test some sort of website, and people could be paid a cent a visit, for example, or a cent per 100 visits, and they would actually go to multiple domains, and they're actually perpetrating fraud without really knowing that. So this is 7% of the web fraud that we have detected, and we call them Cyclops. The next slide is specifically called incentivized ad networks, and there are a lot of them that exist in the U.S. as well as outside the U.S. And essentially, what they are is that if somebody, for example, has a type of disease and they have to buy a certain medicine every month, so they are incentivized to go through this ad network that would give them some sort of kickback for clicking the same ad that is based on their medicine and going to the pharmaceutical company and be able to buy the same medicine that they would, for example, over at Walgreens or CVS. Now, they're also part of a big fraud network because these are mostly CPA campaigns that these folks kind of generate leads for these big pharmaceutical companies, and the ad networks get paid for each lead that they generate. We call them Voldemorts. The next one is probably the most sophisticated ones and that we hear about in the media a lot. They're actually the computer malware. We detected them to be 45% of the web fraud. And the way computer malware works is that this is a piece of software that gets installed on your machine, and these machines, they on a regular basis talk to a bot master. So your machine essentially becomes a bot slave. And they get their instructions from the bot master on a periodic basis. They don't really have any logic on that machine. That means the bot slave does not have any code related or that could be tracked back to the bot master. And the bot master literally gives them the pages that it sets up for them on a daily basis for them to visit and then click on certain links. And those links take them to a certain domain where they actually perpetrate the fraud, where they can see the impressions or they can click on some ads. And these specific pages that the bot master creates for them is called doorway sites that essentially masks the referral URL so that the companies that are trying to detect fraud on their domains where the fraud is actually happening don't know where they really came from. These bot masters are pretty smart where they're located in different co-locations in terms of data centers. And if one bot master gets taken down, the bot slaves automatically know which other data center or which is the next bot master in the queue for them to go and get the instructions from. So we call them waiter bots. The next one is it's also one of the sophisticated frauds, but it mostly happens where this fraud is being perpetrated in the data center itself, where they are computer software which go and visit multiple websites with a random kind of logic in there, where you can't really find a pattern in how they're visiting these websites. They also play around or spoof their IP addresses and the cookies they use, as well as the kind of browser agent or the user agent that they use to visit different websites. We call them phantom bots. The next one is pretty basic. We also call them the click bots. And these bots, they start with the premise that they know that they're going to get caught in a matter of hours or days sometimes, and they will get shut down. So what they try to do is they try to extract as much amount of dollars from the ecosystem as quick as possible. So they're going to go and click on, hundreds and thousands of ads and generate, hundreds and thousands of impressions in a small amount of time, before they get shut down. They used to be, this is one of the first bots that started in the industry. They're pretty low now. They're generally 5% of the web fraud The next one is the retargeting fraud. It's something that's very new. We call them deceptive bots because what they do is they visit a certain type of websites. For example, they will spoof themselves as a travel junkie, somebody who's interesting, for example, is for buying a ticket for visiting Asia, for example. And suddenly, all the DMPs out there and exchanges, it makes them believe that they are interested in some sort of transactions in the next couple of weeks. And essentially what they do is they drive up the CPMs pretty high because suddenly they start seeing very, very targeted ads. So they're essentially deceiving the ad exchanges. And the amount of money they can kind of pull out of the ecosystem is much, much higher, sometimes as much as 3 to 6 times the normal CPMs that we see out there. So we have also detected, a bunch of different traffic patterns that kind of depict the type of attacks that we've seen. And what we've done is we've kind of broken them down into 3 different categories, dummy attacks, smart attacks, as well as genius attacks. And as the name kind of reflects, dummy attacks are high traffic volume per IP address, right? And it's very easy to detect. You will certainly see, 10,000 impressions coming from the same IP address, over a limited amount of time on, a couple of different domains. And it's easy to catch and easy to get rid of. You also see fake browser strings as well, which is pretty obvious. Some browser strings mean user agents, where they don't really fall into any type of a legit browser that exists out there. They also, have a bad JavaScript engine that they've implemented, so they can't really interpret the JavaScript based on the JavaScript specs that are out there. So suddenly you see some weird behavior coming out of these attacks, and it's so easy to kind of detect them as some sort of bot. And then the next one is the smart attacks, where the traffic volume, that is the number of impressions, clicks, are slightly more than normal. They use real browser names and other browser parameters, and then you usually don't have any persistent cookies. So their cookies are turned off almost 100% of the time, which is so you can't really put a stamp on them and be able to track them in their next visits to the same domain. They also have dynamic IP addresses, which means they rotate IP addresses after X number of impressions or clicks, and with conjunction with the cookies being turned off, they're pretty hard to detect. And then you have the genius attacks, where it completely mimics normal traffic, which means they have a random number of impressions, usually lower than 50 per site, and they hit thousands of illegitimate sites as well as legit sites like CNN.com that are out there, or MSN.com, and they kind of hide in the middle of all the real humans that are visiting these sites as well on a daily basis. So what we've done is we actually generated this chart. That what we've done is we've kind of broken them down into different bubbles, and as you can see, the dots that you see on this picture are essentially domain names, right? And the distance between those dots are how often these domains get visited, right? And each dot is essentially a unique domain that's on the internet. So as you can see on the top section, the dummy attacker just really visits a whole bunch of domains in the same amount of time. So that means there's no randomization. So it's and you see a big kind of dark section, and you know that there's somebody who's is coming from the same IP address essentially. And then on the left side, you have the genius attacker, which is the other side of the spectrum. And as you can see, there are really no patterns that you can see. There's no dark section in there where that's some attack is being generated from the same IP address or the same user. And then towards the bottom, you have the smart attacker, which kind of is in the middle of a dummy attacker and a genius attacker that tries to mimic some characteristics of a genius attacker, but are easier to detect than the genius attacker. So towards the bottom, you have another dummy attacker, and this attacker seems like they have picked up a very small amount of domains that they're visiting really very, very quickly in a very short span of time. So now what I'd like to do is kind of focus a little bit more on the mobile, the fraud that happens in mobile. So what happened with the mobile growth, especially in the last year, the mobile growth has been around 10% month over month, which is very, very fast. It was mostly an explosion that happened in mobile. And, the other phenomena is that the mobile ad tech companies, the young ad tech companies were and are getting acquired before their stack even gets matured. The mobile ad tech companies have a hard time to keep up with advertisers' demand with all these explosions that happened. As we can see with the Flappy Bird app that really grew from no users to hundreds and millions of users overnight. So imagine that app, even though it was taken down, but imagine that app signs up with a mobile ad exchange, a publisher, overnight, and suddenly you get a lot of people who are playing that, and advertisers want to advertise on their app. And since that company has really not a lot of background, or ad exchanges can't really do a lot of verification about how the Flappy Bird is kind of doing business, but since it's a very popular app and everybody wants to run an ad on that app, it's really hard to kind of know because such a new phenomena that happens that an app doesn't exist today. In a month, they have millions of users using that app. So these are some of the challenges that are out there. The other challenges with mobile is that the server-to-server integrations are not standardized, which means there's some data that are available in some exchanges that are missing from others. The ads that are being run on mobile are not sometimes not mobile web optimized. Conversions are hard to track. And the reason why mostly fraud happens on mobile is because, as we can see, 40 to 47% of the users click on mobile ads by mistake, more often than they do on purpose. And sometimes game developers deliberately place the ads next to some high-tap areas. Again, like the Flappy Bird example, you tap on that app multiple times, and if there's an ad right next to where you're supposed to tap, then you will most probably than not kind of click on the ad by mistake. The other type of mobile fraud that happens is the fat fingers phenomena, which means the buttons on the mobile screens are getting smaller and our fingers take up a substantial amount of real estate in a modern smartphone. And so, people just end up clicking on ads without really intentionally doing that. Google and these other ad networks and ad exchanges are trying to kind of work around that by really asking the user if they really did click on the ad. And if the user says yes, then they actually take him to the landing page. So the types of mobile fraud, everybody has probably heard of something called click farms, where thousands of people are stuffed in a sweatshop equipped with a lot of different devices and network SIM cards to randomize access and evade detection. So, each person's given like 10 to 15 different devices and a bunch of different SIM cards, and they keep swapping the SIM cards with the devices so that they can, it's hard to detect these folks. And the devices range from anywhere from, Windows to iPhone to different versions of Android. And then there are mobile simulators, which the developers use to develop mobile apps. And what has happened recently is that they have been hacked or modified since since mobile simulator are designed to load mobile apps in there with mobile ads, so they've been modified so that they can load the same apps and the same ads be able to easily click on them after connecting to different proxy servers to evade detection. So what are the other challenges in mobile tracking? Essentially, the cookie crumbles in mobile, and what that means is cookies are not supported in the old wireless devices, or might have a low limit of number of cookies a smartphone can store. And there are really no real standards on how cookies behave in different smartphones. The other phenomenon is called app sandboxing, where apps don't support reading cookies from their browsers. Even though in devices like iPhone, you can instantiate a browser from inside the app, but that browser is sandboxed and does not have access to all the usual cookies that, for example, Safari on that smartphone has or Chrome on that smartphone has. And therefore, the click URLs are forced to switch to Safari to read-write the cookies on mobile before redirecting the user to the landing page or the app store to download some sort of app. Now, this also has a big challenge in the way conversions are tracked on mobile, right? Specifically on installs on CPIs, where it's really hard to kind of match the person that installed the app to when they actually clicked the ad that took them to the app store. And then you have the issue of distributed device tracking, which means, every device has different unique parameters. And, as we know, Apple has been turning off a lot of IDs that you can use to kind of detect a unique device or a fingerprint. And then you have different devices coming up with totally different IDs that are very hard to fingerprint a certain device. For example, in Apple you have Apple ID, which can be reset, which is really supported after iOS 6. And Android, you have completely different IDs that are still yet supported. And then ad exchanges don't support a native third-party tracking, and what that means is they don't support natively third-party impression tracking, and then click tracking only possible through click redirect URLs, which is really hard to do because you have less data, so which means you can see less patterns in the kind of user behaviors out there, and you can really just be able to do click tracking on mobile and be able, and then since device fingerprinting is already a challenge, and you don't have a lot of data about users depending on what ad exchange you're running on, they sometimes don't give you the required information for you to be able to fingerprint a certain users or be able to fingerprint a certain device. And then the other challenge is the IP reverse mapping to geo is flawed in mobile. We cannot use IP reverse mapping as a deterministic user identifications since, carriers like AT&T, for example, provide radio signal connectivity between the users and the local cell tower, which connects to a central server, which is then connected to the internet. So the reverse map of the IP address, for example, is of that server. It could be located anywhere from 20 to 40 miles away, and it's not really the location of the user that there could be 40, 50 to 100 miles difference between where the IP is mapped to versus where the user actually is. With that, I'll pass the session back to Jalal.
Great. Thank you so much, Amin. Folks, I'm just going to go through towards the last end in terms of some of the ways that we are encouraging the folks in the industry, also our potential clients, to start addressing the issue of fraud. But before I jump into that, I do want to take a couple of seconds pause, encourage you folks to ask questions at our Twitter handle, also on our Facebook feed, or send us questions through WebEx. We will be taking questions in like 10 to 12 minutes from now. I know we've been gone into a bit more technical, at a bit more technical level on the mobile side, but it is a very sort of technically challenging area. There are a lot of questions a lot of open items that are still the industry is hashing out. So would definitely encourage you guys to ask questions. Okay, so the good news of attacking fraud. So the good news is that this is not a problem that cannot be solved. It's not an easy problem to solve, as we call it on the computer science world, which is it's not an NP complete problem. With the right technology and the right sort of ways to take care of this, it can definitely be addressed heads on. It's a probabilistic problem to solve. It's not something that you can come in and say, okay, you have to use different methodologies, and we'll go into that, of machine learning, etc., of identifying various fraud patterns, and then coming up with ways to either identifying channels where that fraud is essentially being perpetrated from. So one of the things, what we've done is in this session, we've actually broken down our recommendations for the two channels. One is for the inventory providers or the inventory sellers, and the second one is for the buyers of inventory. So the first and the most fundamental thing that we're encouraging is start checking your inventory. The first thing that you want to know is how much fraud is actually happening either on your website, or in some cases, as most of the publishers, they're also in some ways their marketing team or their traffic acquisition team is running sort of marketing campaigns on, let's say, Google, through SEM, through SEO, through Facebook, et cetera, and trying to acquire traffic from there as well. So one of the things that we are recommending is definitely start to benchmark, use a tool to start benchmarking your inventory sources. The last thing that you want to do is have your chief revenue officer or your head of sales walking into a meeting on the buy side and being surprised that the buy side knows more about your inventory than the company itself. Definitely using a technology that can empower and help you benchmark these. But one of the most fundamental things that we are seeing on the inventory seller side is more coordination between the marketing team and the ad operations team. So generally, the marketing team is the one on the publisher side, which is responsible for acquiring traffic, managing the traffic acquisition channel, and the ad operations team is the one which is responsible for monetizing that channel. So, definitely having a more open dialogue over there on top of the technology. We see that a lot of the issues start to get discussed. Some of the best practices on the inventory buyer side is that, one of the big challenges, as more of the buyers, whether they are networks, exchange, DSPs, agencies, advertisers, et cetera, there's a myth again out there that fraud only happens on just long tail websites or mid-term websites, and high end or the head of the whale is safe from fraudulent transactions. What we are seeing is fraud is happening throughout the ecosystem, whether you're a high end website or whether you are a long tail website. Now, obviously, the distribution of that is different. But making sure that checking that across the board is essentially crucial for this. Then the last part about this is using a technology solution which covers all of your bases. And what I mean by that is when an inventory buyer is not just buying through display channels, they're also in some cases buying mobile inventory as well. Like some of the challenges that Amin was mentioning. They're also buying media on social networks as well, like the social media channels like Facebook, et cetera, and Twitter. Having a technology that is agnostic of the platform itself, whether you're running something on the display side, search side, video side, or mobile side, you can sort of cover all your bases. Because if you start with a platform which just covers only one, it's very hard to find another platform that covers the second part and then start to correlate the users over there becomes extremely challenging. And then another myth buster is, and as we've spent significant amount of our time in the last year and a half looking at ways of blocking fraudulent transactions. While this session is not for the preventative measure, we'll do another webinar for specifically talking about how to block fraud from your media buys. But fraud blocking, if it's just maintained at a domain level, it's not going to be that helpful. Like it needs to be done at both levels. What we're seeing, like if you want to come to a level where your fraud is exposure is minimized in your media buys, you need to have a solution which can block not just the domains or fraudulent domains, that obviously helps a lot, but also has a way of blocking things at the user level as well, where we are also seeing a lot of fraud is getting perpetrated from. So that's sort of like some of the quick guidelines in terms of how we can help. So some quick methodologies about Pixalate. We use, in terms of how we detect fraud, we use a methodology which is a combination of fingerprinting and also looking at some of the macroscopic trends. In terms of how we do that, we use a hybrid approach, which comes up with a probabilistic way of fingerprinting the user in real time. Also looking at some of the patterns that we are seeing on our side, and then sort of marrying those two up to figure out where fraudulent transactions are happening. The other thing which comes through our system is sort of like the network effect, since we are monitoring across hundreds of accounts, billions of impressions and fraudulent transactions. That can be applied across the board, and it's not just specific to one account. We've outlined some of the, at a high level, at a very, very high level, some of the methodology that we use, which is primarily IP address driven. We also look at some of the network gateways and proxies that have been created. A lot of the users who are sitting in some other part of the country use some of the parts of the world, let's say Asia, where we're seeing a lot of the fraud getting perpetrated from, are sitting behind proxies and trying to simulate as if they are a US-based visitor. Also, some of the things which Amin was mentioning, whether we see a machine is accepting cookies or not. One of the most important things that we have done at Pixalate is we actually have our own homegrown list of blacklisted IP addresses, in millions. And that's what we are updating on a daily basis based on the patterns that we are seeing. And on top of that, we are also sort of creating a list of block, fraudulent websites. And some of the things that we mentioned, we look at multiple things, like when those websites were registered, a lot of their metadata, when they're expiring, et cetera, and sort of going to go into the details of that. The other things that we check, and that's how we determine patterns on those, are, how the kind of behavior that, fraudulent users are displaying on a particular website or the channel. Like, for instance, how much time do they spend? Where do they click? Whether the ad gets clicked without the ad getting viewed or not. And, how do they scroll, et cetera. How randomized is that? So we basically check a bunch of, sort of parameters in terms of the behavior that they're displaying. And then, we have created our own taxonomy in terms of how we identify some of the fraudulent behavior. And then what we do is go above and beyond just the IP address. We've come up with our own ways of fingerprinting the user or the device, and then, figuring out as that user sort of moves from one device to the other or changes device sitting behind the same networks, et cetera, we can sort of essentially identify them. We just captured like a few screenshots of how our dashboard looks like. This at a very high level, it's a self-service dashboard. Once you implement our tracker, you start to see, what your loss looks like, how much fraudulent traffic is coming, from where, through which channels. One of the key things that we do is report fraudulent impressions, and not only that, but also fraudulent clicks as well. So you can actually really go down in the funnel. And one of the recent things that we rolled out is, which Amin was mentioning before, is actually details of what kind of fraud is happening on your system, whether that's malware or like some click farms, et cetera. So you can get reporting, very, very detailed reporting on that through our system. So two things before we jump into the question and answer sessions. So what do we provide? So there are two ways that you can enable and use Pixalate. One is our freemium analytics product that we just launched last month. We are providing, or the only company which is providing, free fraud detection and reporting at the impression level across your channels. You get 10 million impressions per month for free. And all the support is not provided, but as a special consideration for the folks who are joining this webinar, for the first 10 attendees who actually sign up for our freemium service, we will give them support for a month for free. And that support includes implementation, onboarding, training, and as much help as we can provide. And then our freemium service lets you track fraud across all your channels, mobile and display, and across the ecosystem, whether it's across the funnel, whether it's clicks, conversion monitoring, and then the other thing is fraud prevention and reporting. So that's like the key thing that we provide along with our block list, et cetera. So with that said, you can get started by going to our website or visiting our blog and signing up over there. And please express interest in terms of the kind of questions that you have, and we can get back to you. With that said, we have concluded sort of the key content. Would love to see if some of you folks have questions or any of the comments, and I will pass this back to Keiko, and she can sort of read some of your questions, and we're happy to address some of them over the next couple of minutes.
We will now begin our Q&A session. If you haven't already done so, please type in your questions into the Q&A window. You could also tweet your questions to Pixalate Inc. or post questions on our Facebook page. Jalal and Amin, it looks like we have a few questions already. The first question is, if I'm buying from an exchange, can you tell me which seller is sending the most fraud?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when you're buying from an exchange, let's say one of the big things is the exchanges themselves are buying from other providers, whether they have direct relationships with publishers or they are buying from other supply-side platforms. One of the key things that we do provide is not only can you see fraud and whether it's impressions or click-based fraud, on your exchange by publishers, but what we can also sort of provide in our platform is you can start to see which seller is repping that publisher or selling the inventory on behalf of that publisher on the exchange. So yes, so you can see impressions broken out by publishers and by exchange. I'll give you another example. Like let's say if somebody's selling a major website like CNN through one channel, through one sort of supply side provider, and then CNN is selling it directly on the exchange itself. So you can see like where are you getting the most fraud from, and what kind of quality are you getting from one seller versus the other for the same website.
Okay, next question. Can you quantify how much money I've lost from fraud?
Yeah, so one of the things we do is we actually take in some of the bid price and also the CPM information in our system, and we do try to quantify exactly how much fraud is happening by channel, and we actually try to quantify that in actual dollar amounts. So yes, we do enable that in our platform.
Does your technology collect any PII?
Yeah, so one of the things, so we do fingerprinting, which I kind of mentioned before, but that we do not collect any PII information or personally identifiable information. We are compliant with the EU cookie law and also the U.S. Sort of regulations as well. Nothing that we are collecting can be mapped back to the user directly. It's a one-way hash that we do. And it cannot be reversed and can map back to that. And we're not collecting anything like names or email addresses or phone numbers, etc. It's really sort of like, the dynamic characteristic of that machine is what we're using to uniquely identify a device.
Okay. You talk about the different kinds of attack vectors. Can you report by each of these vectors?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we mentioned. I mentioned in the presentation. Not only do we provide fraud percentages at a high level, but one of the things that we have enabled is the percentages of fraud by different vectors. And with every iteration of our product, we are actually giving more microscopic information about how that fraud is being perpetrated, and whether it's coming from like, botware, malware, human fraud, smart attacks, genius attacks, etc. So yes.
Okay. What mediums do you cover?
So we cover both, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we cover both the desktop environment and the mobile, and within that we cover all the display ads, buying mobile as well, very sort of comprehensively, and then video, which we showed you some of the benchmarks for, and also we are now sort of moving into the social side and also search side as well, and sort of covering whether you're getting like any fraudulent clicks on there or any fraudulent sort of conversions coming from that channel as well.
How easy is it to integrate your solutions?
Yeah, so our premium service is very easy to integrate. We give out a piece of code, and again, depending on the implementation and what ad server that a particular customer is using, and what kind of implementation they're looking for. The basic implementation is fairly simple. It takes maybe a day or 2 days to get started, and it's a very easy and simple process. Given that you are using a standard advertising environment. For custom ad servers, that varies, and how much control you have over your ad serving environment, etc. But for the most traditional licensed ad servers and exchanges, it's a fairly straightforward process.
Okay. Are there any questions that have come in through Twitter or Facebook that you'd like to cover now?
Yeah, there's one question that came in that I just saw is how much, whose responsibility is it to solve fraud? And I think maybe Garrett asked that question. It's a great question, Garrett. I think the responsibility is the one who's actually buying the media or selling the media. It's their responsibility to start facilitating the process, and it depends on how fraud is getting perpetrated. But really sort of using the right tools and getting ahead of this, really figuring out where that's coming from, whether the media is getting bought or sold directly, whether there's a direct relationship between the buy side and the sell side, or the transaction is happening more fluidly over an exchange. Obviously on an exchange or on a programmatic channel, there's less, there's no direct contact sometimes between the publishing side. So the only thing, at some point, depending on how much money has been spent, is you can target away from fraudulent impressions. And one of the things that we provide is, in our premium solution, is you can start to get things right from the get-go. So you're not wasting your dollars in trying to basically, go through that. On the direct side, we have seen, some of the buyers actually going to the sellers and, asking for a refund, and we've seen some of that, that happen, depending on the leverage that you have on that transaction.
Okay. I think that's it for as far as the Q&A is concerned on my end. If there are no other questions that have come in through Twitter or Facebook, we can go ahead and conclude our presentation. We thank you for your attendance and look forward to having you join us for future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.